So today I decided to take the family to visit some African American historic sites here in St. Mary's County, and our first stop was the Drayden Schoolhouse in Drayden, Maryland. The Drayden Schoolhouse is one of the best preserved African American schoolhouses in the county. It's a one-room schoolhouse which was for grades 1 through 7, and it has not been significantly altered since it was built in 1890. Next, we stopped at the Sotterley Plantation, which is in Hollywood, Maryland. And the land was bought sometime around 1700 by James Bowles. And over the next several decades, the ownership changed at least 4 times. So I'm not going to get into that history, but I do encourage you to come check it out. This is inside of the mansion, and we actually paid for a guided tour, and the tour guide was excellent as she walked us through different portions of the house. Here is a list of slaves that are owned and currently live on the plantation and how much they are worth. And this is the what we would call it, the living room. Today, we would consider this a living room area of the mansion. The tour guide was excellent. She was great at explaining various details of the house, and she didn't sugarcoat anything, which we appreciated. She talked about different aspects of the house that could have been altered or changed for whatever reason. She talked about some things that, some information that was put out there that was probably false in terms of the history. And she also talked honestly about the horrors and the unfortunate lifestyle of the slaves, and the horror of just slavery in general, and what the enslaved people had to go through living there. I was really moved by this portion of the tour.
So the enslaved children would start working at 5, but they would play with the family's children, and the family's children, they would each be given a different doll. So the family's children would play with these dolls, and there you can see that she's dressed up in a long dress she doesn't even fit. Overall, in very good detail, and she's on this big glamorous couch. And then you have the dolls that would be given to the enslaved children, and you can see there's significantly less detail. There's just beads, the servant's hair. Looks very there's definitely a caricature. And she's dressed up in an enslaved outfit. And the purpose of these dolls were to set up these differences right from childhood. So it was to enforce to the enslaved children, this is what you're going to grow up to be, and vice versa for the family's children.
So that piece I thought was interesting. Another interesting thing I thought was this list of enslaved people here, and the list is actually accurate of who worked on the plantation. Here is another portion of the home. This is the dining area. So if you have a dining room, you're going to need someone to cook your meals, right? So the tour guide did a great job telling us some facts about one of the cooks that worked at the plantation. And this is an example of a typical outfit that a cook would wear.
She did escape. She lived out the rest of her life in peace, but she was listed as being worth $500 when she ran away because she did so much work in the house compared to the $8 on Joe we saw earlier. So that was very common for the enslaved people who did more work to be valued at a higher price. But that did not necessarily mean she was treated better, of course. And we will see a facet of that in the next room, which is the larder. So this was originally its own separate building, and it's 250 years old, dating back to the Plato era. So this is where they kept their rations. So they would keep their local vegetables, oysters, ham, and chicken.
So now we move out of the pantry, and now we're going to head to the back of the house, where you can see a lot of the land, and also the back porch of the house, which is very massive. And right behind those trees there is the Patuxent River, where a lot of the ships would come in. As you can see, it's pretty large. And at the end of the tour, she took us to the slave quarters where the slaves would stay. Oftentimes, multiple families in this one room shack. So when you walk into the slave quarters, you can see that the floor is a dirt floor. The ceiling is extremely low. But I must say, as I mentioned earlier, the tour guide did a great job at explaining the harsh conditions that the slaves went through being on the plantation.
So you can see individual stories of the people who lived here on the plaques. And you can see multiple facets of their life. And keep in mind, this wouldn't be for each individual family. These would house many different families and be rather cramped. Oh. The lofts, the stairs would go up to a loft where the children would sleep. Okay. And this was the usual bed they were given.
Do you know how many families or how many people?
No.
No? Okay.
So they would try to keep their cultures alive as much as possible, like how they would cook their food and gather their food, and how they would make their clothes.
Would they be given all their food from the main house that they took it here? Or would they raise some themselves, have some of the fields dedicated to themselves that they would
No.
tend and grow?